They like to say power reveals who you really are. That's a lie. Power doesn't reveal anything. It removes what you can't afford to keep. Caligulio learned that lesson before he ever tasted authority, back when he was still naive enough to believe that borrowed status could become a home. He was born into minor nobility, close enough to the center to see how the world worked, far enough away to never be protected by it. When he married into a baron family, he thought he'd finally crossed the invisible line. Thought acceptance came with the title. Thought loyalty mattered. Then they drugged him, humiliated him, stripped him of name and place, and replaced him like a broken tool. All he heard afterward was laughter dressed up as truth. A dirt-poor knight getting to play a make-believe noble. That sentence followed him longer than any scar. In that moment, something inside Caligulio broke, and something sharper took its place. He understood what no mentor ever taught him. Pride and morality were luxuries afforded only to the powerful. If you didn't already have power, clinging to virtue was just another way to die quietly. So he stopped pretending. With no family to shield him and nothing left to lose, Caligulio leaned into danger the way other men leaned into prayer. Dirty operations, covert work, bribes, blackmail, influence peddling. If the empire rewarded results, then results were all he would deliver, no matter the cost. He didn't rise by being loved. He rose by being useful. By his mid-20s, he was already outpacing men twice his age. Promotions followed efficiency, not honor. Those who complained were left behind. Those who adapted survived. And those who shared his ruthlessness gathered around him like iron filings around a blade. Minitz was one of them. A battle-hungry noble who despised comfort and titles, who valued the front lines more than polished halls. Kanzus was another, uncontrollable, terrifyingly strong, discarded by the system for being too dangerous to manage. Caligulio didn't try to tame them, he aimed them. I used them as much as I possibly could, he would later admit, without apology. Trust between them wasn't built on loyalty or ideals. It was transactional, brutally honest. Each man knew exactly what he was being used for, and agreed anyway. That was the purity of it. No illusions, no promises beyond mutual gain. Together, they courted death so openly that others mistook it for courage, and the Empire rewarded them for it. The armored division, once the Empire's strongest force, became Caligulio's greatest achievement and his quiet indictment. He told himself he was doing it for the Emperor, for stability, for national strength. But the truth came later, when the noise finally died down. It had been for fame, for revenge, for proof that he had never been the fool they cast aside. And that realization hurt more than any battlefield loss. By his early 30s, Caligulio left the front lines behind, not because he had grown tired of war, but because authority offered something sharper: control. Poison had already taken his left eye, but the Empire's obsession with progress gave him a replacement: cold, artificial, hidden beneath an eye patch. A weakness turned into misdirection. Age didn't dull him, power sharpened him. He later described it simply: "It was like I was constantly in the prime of my life." Fear had no place left to stand. Faction building became his real battlefield. Merchant capital funded modernization. Veterans like Ludora became pillars. Old tactics were discarded. The armored division was reforged into something leaner, deadlier, efficient enough to terrify even allies. By his mid-30s, the ascent reached its peak. One of the Empire's 3 generals of the Guardians. On paper, his life was perfect. And then came the reckoning he never ordered. The Baron family that once cast him out collapsed, not by his command, not by his blade, but by the shadow of his influence. Merchants quietly severed ties, budgets dried up, contracts vanished. A once secure house rotted from the inside. Caligulio had achieved revenge without lifting a finger. Instead of satisfaction, he felt emptiness. Power had moved on his behalf. Only then did he fully understand the Empire's rigid economy. As a general, his authority rivaled that of an earl. The merchant who stole his wife had clawed his way into nobility just to survive, but that same system now placed him beneath Caligulio's heel. And still, it wasn't enough. Childless by design, politically safe. He had risen precisely because his legacy would end with him. The military tolerated him. The nobility tolerated him. Tolerance, he knew, was fragile. Betrayal had taught him its final lesson. Mercy invited destruction. The barony still stood, The merchant patriarch still breathed. The earl who enabled them still watched. As long as they lived, the past remained unfinished. I had to eradicate the enemy, or they'd get me next. But a general's power wouldn't be enough. So Caligulio aimed higher, towards something absolute enough to crush nobles, merchants, and empires alike. Then the war ended, and all that ambition was reduced to two men nursing old ghosts over expensive drinks. The Elf Club was meant to be a gesture of reconciliation, polite smiles, neutral ground, a place for survivors to pretend the past could be filed away. Caligulio and Minitz sat there laughing, not because things were funny, but because silence would have been worse. "You weren't much of a pretty sight back then," Minitz said. Caligulio didn't argue. For the first time, he admitted what he'd refused to see. Power had narrowed his world until morality blurred into irrelevance. He had seized the army, dreamed of conquest, and then been erased by overwhelming force. Not humbled by equals, not defeated by strategy, simply crushed. You couldn't even put up a fight. The truth landed without cruelty. Acceptance replaced rage. What surprised Caligulio wasn't his fall. It was the realization that the world was larger than the myths he'd built his life on. Emperor, marshal, gods of war, none of them were absolute. And strangely, that brought relief. The universe no longer revolved around his hatred. Minitz had come full circle too. Once a noble who fled responsibility into the battlefield, he now carried it again as prime minister under the reluctant Emperor Masayuki. Not through ambition, but inevitability. He didn't seek power. Power kept choosing him. Their paths had diverged, yet remained bound. Caligulio, stripped of grand dreams, remained as the last surviving division commander, no longer chasing domination, but preserving what remained. Minitz stood at the heart of a rebuilding empire. What endured between them wasn't ideology or loyalty to a throne, it was shared history. "You got a lot of work to do," Minitz said with a grin. For the first time, Caligulio accepted that without resentment. Under Emperor Masayuki, the empire stood at a fragile crossroads, rebuilding not just its military, but its identity. Reform came swiftly, imperfectly, guided less by doctrine than by instinct. Don't we need a minister controlling the army? That simple question reshaped everything. The result was compromised. Caligulio now wore two crowns, Secretary of the Military and Supreme Commander. The contradiction wasn't lost on anyone. Outwardly, the empire had no enemies left to fight. Surrounded by demon lords, allies, and untouchable powers, its spears turned inward, toward ambitious nobles and bloodlines tied to the old emperor. "As long as I'm running the army," Caligulio said flatly, "I won't rattle my saber at any foreign country." The real danger was internal fracture. Rumors, succession fantasies, ignorance of Lady Velgrynd's authority. The shadow of Ludora still lingered. His false reign, his alliance with the aggressors, the near collapse of everything they knew. Unity wasn't idealism anymore. It was survival. Now is certainly no time for the nation to be fighting amongst itself. At ground level, reform was chaos. The imperial knights were scattered, their loyalty uncertain. Some, like Krishna, dreamed of leaving entirely for Tempest, saved not by command, but by mercy. Only persuasion kept them in place. Others defected in spirit if not in body, forcing Caligulio to confront the truth he once ignored. Fear and hierarchy were no longer enough. So he adapted. The Imperial Guardians would be reshaped. No sacred numbers, no ritualized duels, strength, loyalty, flexibility. Small, mobile units spread across cities, buying time instead of chasing glory. Fewer elites, fewer legends, but those who remained would stand closer to the Emperor than ever before. It was uphill, political, military, moral. Yet in the shared exhaustion between Caligulio and Minitz, there was resolve. The Empire was weaker than under Ludora, but for the first time, it might be worth saving. Caligulio's work gained new meaning. Not rank, not ambition, forward motion. With Rimuru's vision laid bare, he admitted, if we're late on this, we'll be left behind by the rest of the world. The future arrived fast. Rail lines, continental networks. And then Rimuru's casual declaration, spoken over drinks, funded by morning, dominating the skies. He meant every word of it. Airships, magitrains, open airspace. Ideas became infrastructure overnight. Tempest's momentum was terrifying, its confidence unreal. The Empire had no choice but to accept the hand extended from above. Rimuru demanded no reparations beyond airspace rights. Reconstruction followed. Zamdo thrived in Tempest's R&D, proof that cooperation worked. Caligulio watched with envy and resolve. Friendship with Tempest had to be earned. Yet progress carried risk. Once defeat became public, grief would turn into resentment. Rimuru's name might become cursed among the bereaved. Nobles shifted uneasily, wary of Tempest's influence. Order had to be preserved. Development couldn't cost unity. And then came the quiet realization. Rimuru was carrying a burden no one else could see. While others rebuilt, he stared ahead, to the aggressors, to wars yet unfought. Maybe he was shielding them from fear. Maybe he truly saw the threat as insignificant. Either way, his focus never wavered. If he meant to face the storm alone, Caligulio knew his role. The Empire would not be the weight that dragged him down. Internal revolt would be crushed before it bloomed. Stability would be his contribution. They left their drinks behind. By morning, Masayuki was borne home in his palanquin. And the work resumed, quiet, relentless, unglamorous. An empire rebuilding itself. Not on pride, not on vengeance, but on the hard-earned understanding that power, once stripped of illusion, could finally be used for something other than proving worth.